Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Good morning. This is your clergy team from the Gant Chapel on Wednesday, January the 3rd, 2024. And it's Shabbat, January the 6th, when this is playing. I just want to say this is wonderful to be together for the first time in 2024 and to wish you a Shabbat Shalom for the first time in 2024. I thought for the new year, we would all use a treat, which is Torah Lishma. Just studying an unusually evocative and unusually rich piece of Torah. It's a story that many of us know. We know it even as kids in terms of legend, but there's actually an address for it in the canon. This is the famous story of Solomon slicing the baby down the middle. And it's always brought up as a sign of his discernment and his wisdom. It's actually very layered and very troubling and very complex in many ways, and what we want to do today is look at this famous story and then mine it for the wisdom that it can bring all of us as we think about what leadership and what wisdom look like for today. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. והערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So this story suffers from its familiarity, and we always hear it in oral form before we read it. It is the Haftorah. It's the Haftorah from Miketz. And the connection, all the commentators point out, is that in Miketz, Pharaoh has his dream, and Pharaoh's dreams are introduced by Vaikatz Paro. And this Haftorah begins with Vaikatz Shlomo. So Solomon has a dream, Pharaoh has his two dreams, and that's the point of connection. Unfortunately, we almost never get a chance to read this Haftorah because most often Miketz is also the second Shabbat of Hanukkah, and so there's a special Hanukkah Haftorah. This past year, when what turned me on to it was Hanukkah had ended the day before. It had ended Friday, December the 15th. So December the 16th, we actually got to read the Haftorah from Miketz on Parshat Miketz, and I'm reading it again, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a gold mine. So the story we know. The story is two women come to King Solomon, and each says, hey, King, this baby, and they come with one baby, and they say, this baby is mine, and this other woman, she claims it's hers, but her baby died. And the other woman says, no, King, you got it all wrong. This baby is mine. And this other woman, her baby died, and she's trying to steal my baby. It's my baby, King. It's my baby. No, it's my baby. That's the presenting problem for King Solomon. And this is before DNA tests. And, of course, he says, fetch the sword. Okay? We all know what happens next. What I want to do is we're going to actually read the story, as Shai Held would ask us to do, slowly. But there's actually a prequel before the story, and we're going to start with that. And in the prequel, King Solomon is actually skating on thin ice, or to use a different metaphor, he is behind on the count in baseball. He's 0-2. He does two things that are contrary to the laws of the Torah. King Solomon, first of all, marries a woman who is an Egyptian, and Deuteronomy specifically says a king ought not to marry too many women, too many foreign women especially. It's going to it causes his heart to go astray, and the Torah says that explicitly, and King Solomon starts here marrying the Egyptian princess, and he ends up marrying a lot of foreign women, and they in fact turn him into an idolater. By the end of his reign, he's a full-blown idolater. Second of all, as you know, one of the Torah's, Deuteronomy's central preoccupations is centralizing worship at the place where God will choose to attach his name, the temple in Jerusalem. And the book of Deuteronomy says over and over again, don't just offer up sacrifices any which way. You have to take it to Jerusalem. And here King Solomon is offering up sacrifices any which way. So he's 0-2 in the count, and then he has a dream. And let's take a look at it. So Solomon allied himself by marriage with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He married Pharaoh's daughter, brought her to the city of David to live there until he had finished building his palace and the house of the Lord and the walls around Jerusalem. So that's strike one. Strike two. The people, however, continued to offer sacrifices at the open shrines because up to that point no house had been built for the name of the Lord. And Solomon, though he loved the Lord and followed the practices of his father David, also sacrificed and offered at the shrines. And it goes on to say, the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the largest shrine. On that altar, Solomon presented 1,000 burnt offerings. And at Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And so here you have this context where Solomon is offering big sacrifices at some local place, which Deuteronomy specifically says don't do, right? And in big numbers, 1,000 burnt offerings. And Solomon then has a dream. And God says in the dream, ask what shall I grant you? And Solomon said, you ask what shall I grant you? Solomon said, you dealt most graciously with your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness, in integrity of heart. You've continued this great kindness to him by giving him a son, namely me, to occupy his throne, as is now the case. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. In other words, I, Solomon, am the king. But I'm a young lad with no experience in leadership. What do I know about being king? What do I know about being king? I just don't know enough. How am I supposed to lead the people of Israel? I'm a kid. I'm a kid. What do I know about this? Okay? And you're asking me, God, can I have any wish? Okay, here's my wish. Your servant, namely me, finds himself in the midst of the people you have chosen, a people too numerous to be numbered or counted. Grant then your servant, namely me, Solomon, an understanding mind to judge your people, to distinguish between good and bad, for who can judge this vast people of yours? So Solomon says, V'natatal avdecha leiv shomea, lishpodet amcha. Give me an understanding heart, an understanding mind. What I need, God, is wisdom. I need true discernment so that I can do my job. Let's just pause here, right? So the setting for this famous story that we all know about is a guy who's, got this job before his time, and he's already kind of screwing it up. He's already, as a young man, bringing in a foreign wife. Deuteronomy says don't do that. He's already offering lavish sacrifices in the wrong places. Deuteronomy says don't do that. And then he has this dream, and God says, whoa, what can I do for you? And he says, give me a leiv shomea. What do you think of that, and what do you think of that as the context for the famous case of fetch me the sword? Dan?
So first of all, I think Solomon is excellent at pulling the wool over God's eyes. Because if we actually go back to the top of this page, before chapter 3, we see that Solomon is actually not afraid to show leadership. So he actually causes the death of someone who did not fulfill an oath that he had made. He traveled, he left and came back. We're reading that section. So, and then he says, well, remember you said you would do this, and he said, yes, but now you brought down the wrath on your own head, and now and then Solomon goes and and sends someone to put this guy to death. So Solomon, he definitely shows that he actually knows how to be a leader and almost in a ruthless way already. And then the other part that's really interesting is right at the beginning of chapter 3, where it says that even though he loved the Lord and followed the practices of his father David, also sacrificed and offered at the shrines. This is so apologetic. Why is it so apologetic right from the beginning? It's saying, he's done wrong. We know that. And yet it's already been established that that Solomon is already being forgiven right here, even though he's done these two things that he shouldn't do. So that's the interesting beginning of the text.
Yeah, I think that we should do one day a class on dreams, because it's so fascinating, and we can go into psychological aspects of it. Why do we dream certain things? Perhaps it's our conscious talking, And clearly, he's struggling with all his acts. He's not the guy who says, I don't care, what my dad has done and everything. He's actually asking for help.
Yeah, I like that.
I kind of want to go in a different direction than either of you here, in that I kind of see him before this ask kind of as a local politician. Like, it's not so much, right? It's not that he's mentally anguished about the sacrifices and he loves God and, oh boy, like, why am I doing all this? He knows he loves God. He's sacrificing to God. But when he goes out into the land, he's going to do what the people there do. He's going to, kiss the babies and shake the hands and eat the Fritos or whatever it is that's the local...
The pulled pork.
The pulled pork, right?
Yeah.
He's going to go out and he's going to make a nod to the people he finds in whatever place he does. And he views that kind of as his way to govern. He's governing by being likable. And he realizes perhaps that there's something missing in that. And I kind of think about his wish as, all those jokes that talk about the 3 wishes you have with genies, right, in the bottle. And inevitably somebody gets them wrong, right? There's the one about the guy on the boat and his 2 friends wish themselves off the boat. And in the end, he comes back and what's your wish? I wish my friends were here, right? Then they're all back on the boat again. We're always getting that wish wrong. And what's so fascinating about Solomon is he gets that wish right. He gets it right. He gets that, like, there's not substance to what he's doing, and he has to get kind of a compass. What he's asking for is a compass for how do I not just put my finger up in the wind and figure out which way the wind is blowing, how do I find my own calling here as a leader?
Right, so putting this all together, what I hear you saying is the dream is somehow an acknowledgement of his vulnerability or an acknowledgement of I need help. It's a beautiful thing when a leader says I need help. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. And the dream is a version of that. And whether it's because he acted already perhaps too impetuously or too arrogantly for his own turf, or whether it's because he's just a hail fellow, well-met politician at the state fair eating pulled pork and wondering where's the substance, he has a dream that says, God, geez Louise, I'm a king. I think I need more substance, and I need a moral compass. I need a lave, shomea, an understanding heart. And that's his dream. And then we'll pick it up. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. God said to him, because you asked for this, you did not ask for long life. You did not ask for riches. You did not ask for the life of your enemies. But you asked for discernment in dispensing justice. I now do as you have spoken. I grant you a wise and discerning mind. Natati lecha lev chacham v'navan. I'm going to grant you a wise and discerning mind. There has never been anyone like you before, nor will anyone like you arise again. And also, by the way, P.S., I also grant you what you did not ask for, both riches and glory all your life, the like of which no king has ever had. And I will further grant you long life if you will walk in my ways and observe my commandments, as did your father David. That is the prequel. So he asks for, Solomon says, we'll go with the Elias thesis. I'm a little vulnerable. I need help. We'll go with the Michelle thesis. He gets it right. I'll give you 3 wishes. And he asks for 1 wish. Give me an discernment, lev shomea. Right answer. Ding, 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 ding. You get it all. And then that's all before the Haftorah. Now the Haftorah begins. And the Haftarah begins, Veikatz Shlomo. Solomon awoke. It was a dream. He went to Jerusalem and stood before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, sacrificed burnt offerings, presented offerings of well-being, and he made a banquet for all his courtiers. So he wakes up from the dream, and all of a sudden he rectifies and he remedies. Instead of offering sacrifices at the wrong place, he goes to Jerusalem, he follows the book, he's pious. This is like between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when we really get our act together, we're really going to fix what we did wrong. He does it in Jerusalem, he stays at the inn ball, he's Mr. Pious, he's King Pious, and so far so good. And then comes ordinary life. What happens next? So, Aliza, I'm going to ask you to read this story, And now this story is apparently an instantiation, embodiment of the dream of a Lev Shomea. So if you'll pick it up with page 4, verse 16, later 2 prostitutes.
Later 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The first woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. On the 3rd day after I was delivered, this woman also gave birth to a child. We were alone. There was no one else with us in the house, just the 2 of us in the house. During the night, this woman's child died because she lay on it. She arose in the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant was asleep, and laid him in her bosom, and she laid her dead son in my bosom. When I arose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was, dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, it was not the son I had born." The other woman spoke up. "No, the live one is my son, and the dead one is yours." But the first insisted, "No, the dead boy is yours, and the mine is the living one." And they went on arguing before the king. The king said, "One says, 'This is my son, the live one, and the dead one is yours.' And the other says, 'No, the dead boy is yours, and mine is the live one.' So the king gave the order, 'Fetch me a sword.' A sword was brought before the king, and the king said, 'Cut the live child in 2, and give half to one and half to the other.'"
Let's just pause, okay? Let's just pause here. Fetch me a sword. What is this is, in its own context, an instantiation of the dream of a Lev Shomea. I need an understanding heart and a discerning mind. How is fetch me a sword the fulfillment of that dream? And what do you think of that? I mean, and it's great to have a gender mix here. And we're different genders in different stages of life, including a very young mother of a very young child. How do you read this story, Elisa?
So I used to really find this as a beautiful story of wisdom, and you could just see these women. Now that I'm a mother of a very young son, I cannot this story makes no sense on any level. I mean, first of all, the idea that you're asleep with a newborn is like you're never asleep. Like you're always somewhat awake, a little bit asleep, but you're waking up how often do you waking up overnight every single night with a newborn, and also the way that his wisdom only works on the basis of one mother struggling with serious postpartum depression or like having really lost her mind in a way that like it doesn't make sense. A rational person would not say like it only works on the basis of one mother being totally irrational and willing to kill a child rather than have the other one have a live child, which is I just ugh.
So it went to you. In other words, at one point in your life, this story was a lovely story of wisdom. Now that you're a young mother of a young son, it's a yuck.
100%.
100% yuck. Michelle, your read.
I mean, I agree with the 100%. Yeah, I
100%
like
yuck.
any story about killing babies is not a lovely story. So
Okay.
we'll start there. I'm really taken with Solomon in this role in Hebrew. Up at the top of the page, it says that they're nashim zonot. It doesn't really capture it in the English that we say these are 2 prostitutes who came.
Right.
But in the Hebrew, you get that these are 2 women who are prostitutes. And I feel like that matters. You don't have to say it in Hebrew that way. You could just say zonot. Like the idea that these are 2 women who are prostitutes feels to me like Solomon is seeing them more for their humanity than for their station. Maybe even more for their humanity than whatever perhaps mental health ailment is going on, or even the struggle that they're facing here. It's almost as he says, okay, these are 2 humans who I'm now going to try to tap into their humanity. And humanity would say that in the case of a baby being threatened, right, there's an instinctive response to that. Now, I don't know how he gets the idea that one of them would not have that, because even if it wasn't my belly, if Eder, right, was about to be cut in half with a sword, God forbid, I would say, no, please give him to Eliza. Right? Just not. So I do think that there's something missing in the fact that he assumes that the reaction from the one who says that the child is hers that's not, is definitely going to be okay, fine, which it is, right? It somehow happens that this woman says, okay, fine, great, that sounds good to me. So
And
it
but
strains
also-
credulity.
At least just one quick, your read of this is the mother who says, fine, slice them in half. You're reading this as a case of serious postpartum depression, postpartum mental illness, mental unwellness. And instead of seeing that, King Solomon doesn't see that. And
No, but I actually think it may be that he does see that. The fact that he sees their humanity, he may see that one of them is somehow divorced from the normal human response and is acting in a way
But
that a
can
test
I put a
could
little
discern.
thing that I never understood from this story? In theory, the person telling this story is the woman whose baby is still alive. All right? Right? And on verse 19, she says, during the night, it says, at the middle of 18, we were alone. There was no one else with us in the house. But if you go down 4 lines, it says, while your maidservant was asleep. So she doesn't make any sense
no,
either.
by maidservant, she means herself. She's saying we were alone. It was me and the maidservant. She's referring
Oh,
to
not
herself.
another help.
Yeah. So I want to, Elisa, pick up.
Thank you.
Before
With all the challenges of this.
Can I jump in for
Yeah.
one other thing? Because
Yeah.
there's also something that doesn't make sense to me, which is that like, if Solomon's really responding from an insightful, discerning, wise mind, it boggles my mind that he doesn't spend more time like going through the process of like how old was your baby and what were they wearing. Like,
Right.
there's a lot of like if you're in that moment and maybe we can give the benefit of the doubt, and maybe I love your read. It gives him so much that he sees their humanity, and that gives him the sense that he's going to respond. There's a mother that is in a place of insanity, and she has lost her mind, and he responds from a place of insanity and meets her there and is able to get it that way. But then there's also part of me that's like, but you're acting insane, Solomon. Like, there's a point where you're like, let's talk about this. Let's go through the details. Let's go, like, let's walk through. There's other ways of doing
yeah.
this.
So
That's
let me
so
just, So I think your comment, Elisa, raises the question, how else might Solomon have handled it? What else might he have done? And what I hear you saying is he could have actually talked to each of them and said, why don't we sit
Really
and talk?
difficult. But
Yeah,
that's so hard.
So he'll say to each of them, you know what, I want to have a private conversation with each of you. So please take a seat. Here's a cup of coffee. Here's some tea. Here's some honey and ginger. Here's a sliced apple. I'm going to be with this other woman.
He wasn't
and
Freud.
Vice versa. And then he sits and talks and says, tell me your story, and then asks some more questions and does some research and maybe even says, part of wisdom is one person is not a team, and maybe I need some colleagues, and this is serious, life itself is at risk, your hearts are at risk, this baby is at risk, I don't have enough wisdom in myself, let me talk to you, let me get some therapists, let me get some wise people, let's get some conversation, let's get some consultation, and then once I do it with you, then I sit and talk
Who
to
would
the
do
others.
that?
never
Wait,
gonna-
wait,
that's
who
never
would
gonna
do that as
result.
a king?
Right. And also that's never going to result where you want to go. That's going to take you farther down the rabbit hole of both of their stories.
Right.
So interesting. I told my children last night that we were
Right.
going to have this conversation, and I asked them, so what would happen, like not what could he have done instead, but what would happen if both women had said, okay, that works for me.
Right.
And my children all responded, well, that's obvious. Then he would have said, thank you, this baby is a ward of the court. Like, their impression was that this was a test, and that if one woman failed, great, you've got your answer. But if both women fail, you also have got your answer, and that it's not that
And
you
then you
slice.
take- right.
You don't actually slice the baby.
It's a trial by
But there's a
ordeal.
third
I honestly
possibility,
think
which is that
it's-
both women succeed. What if both women had said, don't cut the baby? Like, that's
I
also
think-
totally possible. That doesn't happen here.
I
But it's
think-
entirely possible, and then what?
Right.
So, okay.
I honestly think that, this is my view on this, I think that the story is brilliant, and I think that Solomon is acting like no other king has acted before, and it's the idea of showing how smart he was. I doubt that he would say, okay, let's slice the baby in half.
Right. So what I hear you saying together with Michelle's kids is that his intent was always, I'm never going to actually slice the baby. Give me a sword so I can. It's kind of like the sota, trial by ordeal, where you drink the potion with the parchment dissolved. I'm going to do. It's like Abraham and the sword with Isaac. It's like a show of of theatrics and histrionics, and then that will cause the real mother to show up. And if both of them say, okay, slice the baby in half, he puts the sword down and becomes the ward of the state. Okay. Let's just figure out, in addition, though, to what happens is how it's received by Israel. So, Elisa, pick up with verse 26. But the woman whose son.
But the woman whose son was the live one pleaded with the king, for she was overcome with compassion for her son. Please, my lord, she cried, give her the live child, only don't kill it. The other insisted, it shall be neither yours nor mine. Cut it in two. Then the king spoke up. Give the live child to her, he said, and do not put it to death. She is its mother. When all Israel heard the decision that the king had rendered, they stood in awe of the king, for they saw that he possessed divine wisdom to execute justice.
And one more sentence.
King Solomon was now king over all Israel.
Right. It ends with Vayi HaMelech Shlomo Melech al Kol Yisrael. And we Jews are a diverse lot, and we have differences of opinion. And here, this act was the reception of it, the way it landed, is that this act was so utterly brilliant. Like, oh my God, divine wisdom in a king, that 100 Jews out of 100 said, he's my guy. That's how it ends. In other words, this is his, like, David becomes David when he slays Goliath, and with 5 smooth stones, and Solomon becomes King Solomon with this moment. So, Eliza, your read was it was a yuck story, and yet the reception at the time and the canonical reception of it, because this is the Haftorah, is this yuck moment is what made him king. How do you process that dissonance?
I feel like there are lots of reasons people gravitate towards leaders, and I don't get it. I like, it's funny. If you asked me 5 years ago, I would have been like, I see it. He's able to see these people. He's able to judge. Now I'm just like, ugh. Like, I don't, like, this is just a gross story. It's not, for me, it's not a model of wisdom. It's not him acting in justice. Like, it's pushing people and sending people in a horrific mental possibility for the sake of figuring something out that could have been discernible another way.
Do you think it maybe has to do with his ability to step into the breach here, in the sense that he is not afraid to step into something messy and hard and impossible to understand from outside of the situation, and say, we're going to find a way through this. We're going to push our way through this, and we're going to do it in a way that is out of the box, and it's going to have an obvious solution. Now, who knows what would have happened if both women had said, oh, please save the child. Then maybe he wouldn't have
or please slice the child.
Right? Then, well, I think if they had both said, please slice the child, then and he had been able to not actually do that, he might have won some credit for not going through with it. If that had been his choice, God willing. But if both had said, I think you do have the real problem. But I think the sense of, why does everybody who hears it say, wow, right? I think part of the answer is that he's not afraid.
He's not afraid to act.
He's not afraid to try this out of the box thing. He's not afraid to try to tackle the real gritty, awful, horrible moments of life. He doesn't shy away from it. He's not too delicate to deal with it. He deals.
So, can I just tell you?
Can I say something that stands out for me? Sorry, I have a different view from you. How many times we've seen movies where there are fights about gladiators and stuff like that, and they are killing each other, and then one is about to kill the other, and what do? They look at the king, and the king does this or that, all right? So usually kings are super ruthless in the Middle Ages and even before and in these times. So I think, I still insist, I think this move was brilliant because it was completely using his mind rather than his heart and let's kill.
So I want to just pause for a second and expand the frame a little bit, the way that our tradition would do it, both the biblical tradition with Vayikatz Shlomo and Vayikatz Paro, and also the rabbinic tradition. So biblically, this story is connected to Joseph and interpreting Pharaoh's dream because of Vayikatz. And rabbinically, they're connected because this story is the Haftarah from Miketz, even though we seldom get a chance to read it, but we read it on December 16th. So that naturally raises the question, how to compare Solomon's wisdom to Joseph's wisdom. So Solomon's wisdom is, fetch me a sword. Joseph's wisdom, upon hearing Pharaoh's dreams of the 7 fat cows being consumed by the 7 thin cows and the 7 fat stalks of corn being consumed by the 7 thin stalks of corn, is, oh, Pharaoh, that's the years of plenty, the good times. 7 fat years of abundance are going to be consumed by 7 years of scarcity and drought and famine, and nobody's going to remember the good times. All they're going to remember is the hard times, and therefore we need to plan for it. Let's be planful. Let's be intentional. Let's not waste anything. Let's gather all the grain during the good years so that we'll have enough grain during the bad years and the hard years and the lean years, which, of course, is what happened. How do you compare Solomon's wisdom to Joseph's wisdom? What's the genre of wisdom of fetch me a sword to the genre of wisdom, let's get granaries going so that we cannot waste one stitch of grain, let's save it all and we'll be planful. Planful wisdom versus, ordeal wisdom.
Well, I think also if I were picking a wise person, it would be Joseph, not Solomon, because Joseph is measured and thoughtful in his approach, because Joseph sits back and thinks things through before acting, because Joseph has a thoughtful response to what happens in his life. And Solomon is impetuous and impulsive and rash, and I love a Solomon. I love Solomon, just be clear.
Married a Solomon.
I married a Solomon, but in the Bible, I just find him 700 wives. He has no impulse control. And it's just...
Right. I think it's actually a really good point. I mentioned before Andy Stanley a few thousand times, and Andy Stanley has this whole leadership podcast about the most important quality of a leadership is self-leadership, and that we are all our own worst enemies, and that we have participated in, this is all Andy Stanley 101, we have participated in 100% of our own worst decisions, and that a leader can't be a leader worth following unless they lead themselves first and lead themselves well. And he talks about what do you need to do self-leadership. There's a whole podcast. And among what you need for self-leadership is you need to lead yourself, but you can't lead yourself by yourself. You need a team of colleagues that you can trust and other things. And that without self-leadership, then you're gonna just flame out. And Andy Stanley says he'll be at home watching TV, and I'll find another famous pastor who's a gifted orator and a brilliant fundraiser and very charismatic and very electric and very on top of the world. And because this pastor couldn't do self-leadership, flames out and loses this. And he says it happens all the time in ministry. It happens all the time in so many fields. And I think King Solomon is the biblical example of this. Somebody who was charismatic and wise or whatever, depending on your definition of wisdom, but he clearly flames out, and he's a failure as a king because he doesn't do self-leadership. And then you have Joseph, who is this measured response and planful for the 7 fat years.
Yeah, but
want-
we have to put something on the table. Solomon is a king. Joseph is not a king. He's an advisor to whatever Pharaoh was, the king. So they are in completely different political, situations and roles as a leader.
Right.
So, Joseph can take the back seat a little bit.
Right. So, but this perhaps suggests that we don't really do kings for a good reason. That the royal response, which is, I am the state, just follow my gut, follow my intuition, really doesn't work so well. And that what works much better is humility, consultation, collaboration, teamwork. I mean, I'm actually grateful for the conversation and grateful for the idea that what you would want, what the system would do better with than a king operating out of the gut and saying, let's come with trial by ordeal, is let's slow down the clock, let's have consultation, let's have conversation, let me learn more. There's so much I don't know. Yeah. And I know there's so much I don't know about the facts of this child, and there's so much I don't know about mental illness, etc. I need wisdom. And you, to your point, Elias, you can't do that if you're the king and you're supposed to know it all. And so maybe the humble leader is the wiser leader.
Yeah, one quick message, and then you talk because it's your birthday. And happy birthday. Is that when you guys always talk about we don't do kings, it's interesting because I come from a different part of the world. I don't know if anybody knew about that, but let's go and ask. I would love to ask Jews from Britain that what would they say? We don't do kings. You know, it's fascinating because they are born in completely different environment, and America has been in democracy for what, 300 years. So it's really interesting. And then my point is that we don't do kings. And what do Jewish people do? We recite Psalms every day that were written mostly by a king, okay, King David. And then we go to Jerusalem and we pray at the wall that was part of a wall that surrounded a temple built by a king.
Yeah, that's great. But the king is God, not a human king.
Yeah.
You know, and I got enough problems with God as king, but at least God is
No, but you understand
right,
what I'm
I
saying.
understand, but human kings are more problematic. So Dan, we're going to give you the first dibs on this because it is your birthday. Happy birthday. Here's the question I want to ask. What do we learn from this story about Solomon and the implied contrast between the story about Joseph, Solomon's wisdom, Joseph's wisdom? What does this teach us today about wisdom? Let's just do a lightning round and end with that. Happy birthday, Dan. You're on.
Right, so I would say one of the the real difference, I think, between Joseph and Solomon is that Joseph always understood that what he had was a gift of God. And I don't think Solomon understood that. So, you know, and like you say, he was very impetuous, he was very king-like. And so I think that that's a very, very huge difference, even though the stations were very different. The other thing I wanted to just to sum up also is thinking about the beginning of chapter 4, which says, Vayhi HaMelech Shlomo Melech HaKol Yisrael, you know, that King Solomon was now king over all of Israel. I think that's actually, there were 3 parts to that. It's not about the wisdom moment only, but it's about his first act of showing that he can actually take care of business. Secondly, that he can change. And then thirdly, that once he's actually been able to make that change, that he's now able to move forward and demonstrate that it's not only about power and not only about change, but also about believing in God and accepting God's gift of wisdom.
Michelle, what's the lesson?
I find both of these characters challenging. The idea that Joseph is somehow, you know, so wise and, you know, he very much takes advantage of the situation that he's in, which is fully in character with before. But Joseph's story is a story about a corrective towards growth, right? That his growth is sort of overcoming his past hubris, his past immaturity, his past difficulties with impulse control, all of those things. And I think that Solomon as well is about, you know, if you were to follow what I had said before, which is that he kind of did whatever made everybody around him feel good. Maybe he's a politician pleaser. Then it really is important. It's a growth moment. It's a corrective for him that he now can listen to his own voice or to the voice of God inside of him and act decisively. So for me, I would say the lesson of both is that they are works in progress.
Elias?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that it would have been interesting to see what Joseph would have done as a king. You know, because again, one thing is to be an advisor, say, I advise and then I go to sleep. You know, I don't have to make the big decisions or anything like that. And so, I mean, I think they are both fabulous, you know, leaders on their own way, and it's not either one or the other. For me, it's both, and learning from both stories is unbelievable.
Elisa?
So I read the end of this story as a cautionary tale about what we think of as wise, that the people of Israel are swayed by an act that is just lucky at best, and that it's very easy for us to be taken in by stories and by narratives that we don't fully investigate. And what's most important is that we take the time to really think critically and gather all the information and do our own processing, and that we're not swayed by the most popular vote on the thing, the most hip thing on the internet, that we are really thinking and discerning, and that will save us from dangerous situations and from dangerous leaders.
So I'll end this way. In Solomon's dream, he asked for a lev shomea, a listening heart. And to me, the leadership lesson and the life lesson is that menschlichkeit and leadership are about humility. Listening is humble. Listening is humble. When you're listening, you're not talking. When you're lev shomea, you're listening, you're like, what do I not know? What do I not understand? What can you tell me that would be enlightening? I want to learn from you. A lev shomea. So, and the irony is that Solomon prays for a lev shomea, and he does no shomea. He prays for a listening heart, and he does no listening. He just talks. Whoop, oh, okay, done. And here's what we're going to do. Fetch me a sword. No listening. And to me, the moral of the story is listen, be humble, and get good colleagues. Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
And happy birthday, Dan.